The call had ended for everyone else. Or at least, that's what they thought. I stayed, hidden behind the black rectangle of camera off, headphones on, pretending I'd left the meeting. The soft glow of my laptop painted rectangles of light across my desk, my notebook, and the edge of a coffee cup I hadn't touched in 30 minutes. The hum of my fan was steady, almost comforting, a quiet reminder that the world outside this small digital square went on. Then I heard it. Soft, careless, almost casual. Like it wasn't meant to reach me, but it did. She's slow, soft, not leadership. The words landed in my chest like stones. Not sharp anger, not tears, but the deep, familiar sting of dismissal. A beat later, my heartbeat synchronized with it, not panic, not reaction, just recognition. This is the kind of moment Black women know too well in corporate America. Underestimated, dismissed, evaluated before having the chance to show full capacity. I didn't cry. I didn't snap. I didn't speak. I exhaled slowly, counting silently to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The tension released in the rhythm of my breathing. I hit the camera off, leaned back, closed my eyes. The room around me hummed the faint click of keyboards, someone sighing, soft mutters in the background. And yet, in that quiet, something powerful stirred inside me. Not revenge, not pride, quiet, deliberate power. The kind that grows in shadows, invisible until unstoppable. I let the words hang in the air, tasting each syllable. Slow, soft, not leadership. I cataloged them mentally, analyzing, mapping. Every assumption, every micro-judgment, every tiny underestimation became data. The timing of their words, the slight smirk in someone's glance, the way my manager didn't correct them. All of it. I wrote one word in my notebook. Opportunity. Their perception of me was clouded by bias, outdated notions of leadership, and assumptions about what a Black woman could or couldn't do in this room. And yet here I was, fully present, absorbing everything they thought they were hiding from me. Every careless whisper became a tool, every microaggression a clue. I realized in that moment the advantage I held. They underestimated me. I leaned forward, pen in hand, and began to write not just their words, but the implications. Areas to sharpen, skills to refine, decisions to anticipate. I imagined a 90-day map of my growth, each move deliberate, each improvement invisible until the moment it became undeniable. Every small note was a building block toward a silent, unstoppable rise. Minutes passed. The conversation moved on. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply observed, calculated, and planned. The sting of those words faded, replaced with clarity. Their whispers weren't chains they were kindling. I closed my eyes for a moment, visualizing myself in 90 days, confident, prepared, delivering results that no one could ignore. The quiet, calculated work I would do, unannounced, uncelebrated yet monumental in impact. I smiled softly, not smugly, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who knows the game has changed, even if the players haven't realized it yet. I exhaled one last slow breath. Eyes still closed, chest steady, mind sharp. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "Okay, let's begin." Because in that moment, I wasn't just hearing criticism. I was hearing the blueprint for growth. The first move in a game they had no idea I was playing. And this time, I was already 3 steps ahead. The room was still buzzing with ideas, charts, and chatter, but I stayed hidden behind my muted camera, headphones on. They didn't know I was listening. And yet, I could feel the undercurrent, the subtle judgments floating in the space between their words. Each one landed like a small weight on my shoulders, a whisper here, a sigh there, a glance that lingered just a second too long. Slow, soft, not leadership. Those words kept repeating in my mind, echoing, not as criticism but as clarity. I felt a prick of pain, not sharp, not enough to derail me, but enough to fuel attention, to focus. My hands hovered over my notebook. I scribbled fragments: presentation, clarity, timing adjustments, decision visibility. Not random notes. Every observation became a blueprint, a tiny map toward what needed to change. I didn't need them to see me grow. I just needed to know the path. A colleague leaned back, smirking faintly as they spoke over someone else, dismissing an idea. I caught the motion in my periphery. A subtle shift of shoulders, a hand flick, a pause before a comment. They thought they were casual, careless, human. But I saw it differently. Every micro-gesture was a story. Who they trusted, what they overlooked, how they evaluated risk. I wrote that down too. Perception is everything. I felt a slow pulse of tension behind my ribs, a reminder that this was no longer just about work. It was about positioning, about being seen in the ways that mattered without ever losing control. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the next 90 days, hours spent mastering software, refining reports, practicing pitches. I imagined myself stepping into meetings with the quiet confidence that made people pause, not because I shouted, but because my presence, my preparation, and my skill demanded attention. The call went on. They argued over minor details, laughed at someone's suggestion, dismissed another with a half smile. My fingers scribbled faster, noting not the words themselves, but the dynamics. Who interrupted, who leaned forward, who avoided eye contact. It was like watching a chessboard unfold, move by move, while everyone else was playing checkers. And I was already 3 steps ahead. A brief laugh floated through the headphones, and I felt the sting again. But this time, it was different. Not raw, not surprising. Just data, fuel, motivation. I traced the memory of every time someone assumed I couldn't handle responsibility, every project passed over, every idea laughed at. I remembered the promotions that never came, the side eye in brainstorm sessions, the casual dismissal of my suggestions. And I did something I rarely did in those moments. I smiled, quietly, to myself, because for the first time I realized something fundamental. Their perception didn't define me. Their doubts didn't limit me. Their assumptions weren't reality, they were opportunities. I began categorizing each observation into 3 things: what I could control, what I could influence, and what I would simply let reveal itself through results. I glanced at my notebook again. Lines of notes, scribbles, arrows pointing to other notes. It looked chaotic to anyone else, but to me, it was clarity. Every critique, every whispered judgment, every microaggression, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. The puzzle of how to grow, silently, intentionally, and impossibly visible when it counted. My breath slowed, my chest relaxed, my shoulders rolled back. I realized the first crack wasn't in me. It was in the illusion they had about me. They thought I was soft, slow, invisible. But inside, I was sharpening, refining, growing. And that quiet, invisible growth, that was my power. I took a sip of coffee, cold, almost forgotten, but I let the heat from the laptop warm my hands. I imagined a future where each whisper, each judgment, each doubted capability would turn into proof of mastery. I imagined walking into the next meeting, presenting, deciding, excelling, and watching disbelief ripple through the room. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted them embarrassed, but because the truth of my work would speak louder than their words ever could. I leaned back, pen in hand, watching the screen as their conversation continued. I could feel every glance, every inflection, every micro movement. I began sketching a rough plan: skills to master, projects to own, timelines to track, metrics to measure. And for the first time in a long time, I felt complete control. The quiet control that comes not from loud assertion, but from preparation, observation, and relentless action. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the laptop and the distant typing lull me into calm focus. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive in this environment. I would thrive. Silently, strategically, and in a few months, the same people who dismissed me would see a version of me that they could never ignore. When I opened my eyes, I wrote one final note: first crack, first move. And with that, I knew the game had begun, and this time I held all the pieces. The first day after that call, I opened my notebook and stared at the words I had written. Opportunity. That single word pulsed like a compass, pointing me toward the next 90 days. I didn't announce anything. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest colleagues. This was my private mission, my strategic climb, invisible but deliberate. I started small, refining the way I presented data. Every chart, every slide, every graph had to tell the story I wanted: clear, concise, undeniable. I double-checked sources, reworked formulas, practiced the flow of my voice, even the cadence of my pauses. I recorded myself, rewound, listened, critiqued, adjusted. Some evenings I caught my reflection in the darkened screen, whispering, "They won't see this coming." Next came decisions. I reviewed every process I was responsible for, every report I delivered. If something could be more efficient, more precise, more thorough, I made it so. I asked questions others overlooked, read deeper into company metrics, cross-referenced client feedback, identified small leaks in workflow that no one else noticed. Every adjustment was quiet, methodical, invisible to the casual eye, but it was transforming everything. I tracked metrics obsessively: productivity, error reduction, client satisfaction scores, timeline adherence. I even created mini dashboards for myself, a private reflection of progress that no one could see. By the end of week 2, I already noticed subtle differences. Tasks were completed faster, reports were cleaner, colleagues were starting to notice reliability without knowing why. Learning became my ritual. I watched webinars on leadership I had ignored before, read case studies, dissected presentations by executives I admired. I practiced new frameworks, refined negotiation skills, mastered software tools that used to feel cumbersome. Every night, I reviewed what I had implemented, what had worked, what could be better. My room became a quiet lab of improvement. Projects became arenas for subtle victories. One by one, I implemented changes in workflow, introduced slight efficiencies, polished communication. Each success was measured, documented, silent. No announcements, no self-congratulation. I let the work speak first, and slowly, patterns emerged. My contributions weren't just visible. They were impossible to ignore if anyone paid attention closely. Colleagues began to notice small things: a perfectly timed solution in a meeting, a report delivered early with no errors, a client impressed enough to follow up with praise, but they didn't know the full scope. They couldn't. The transformation was invisible, layered, cumulative. Quiet power worked in layers like that: slow, consistent, unstoppable. I also tracked my own internal growth: confidence in decisions, clarity in communication, ability to anticipate challenges before they appeared. Each micro-adjustment became a building block. Each skill sharpened became a weapon in my arsenal, not for attack, but for undeniable competence. By the end of 30 days, I had a rhythm. Every morning started with a review of feedback from the previous day, a check-in with my own goals, and a plan for what to improve next. Every meeting, every email, every project was a chance to practice, refine, and perfect. The sting of those whispered words, slow, soft, not leadership, had transformed into fuel. By day 60, subtle victories became visible patterns. Managers started commenting, quietly, on improved clarity, precision, and efficiency. Colleagues who had whispered doubts before now sought my input. Yet, I remained understated. I didn't flaunt growth. I let the results speak. That was the power. That was the silent strategy. At 90 days, the transformation was undeniable. Metrics, KPIs, client satisfaction, internal workflow efficiency all pointed to one conclusion. I had elevated every standard, exceeded expectations, and done so quietly, intentionally, without fanfare. My quiet power had become visible, not because I announced it, but because excellence cannot be ignored. I leaned back in my chair that evening, looking at the screen, reflecting on the journey. 90 days of deliberate work, silent victories, and invisible mastery had produced results that spoke louder than any critique ever could. The room was still dim, the hum of the fans soft, but I felt a surge of satisfaction, calm and deep. Not revenge, not drama, just undeniable proof that focused, intelligent, strategic growth always wins. I scribbled one final note in my notebook. Silent victory. Evidence. Proof. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, private smile. They hadn't expected this. They couldn't have. And when the results hit, the disbelief on their faces would be an echo of their earlier whispers. The quiet power I cultivated layer by layer, day by day, was now a force no one could ignore. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. By day 91, the path was clear. I had gathered data, honed skills, and proven, quietly, that I could deliver results beyond expectation. But this wasn't the end. It was the setup. The next phase wasn't just about improvement. It was about strategy, the kind that works silently, deliberately, in ways others wouldn't anticipate. I spread my notes across the desk, notebooks stacked like tiny towers of potential. Charts, metrics, feedback points, arrows, highlights, all forming a mosaic of where I could excel, where others wouldn't notice, where the impact would be undeniable. I wasn't aiming for applause. I was aiming for impossible to ignore results. Every project became a calculated move. If a client meeting could be elevated with one tweak, I did it. If a process could be smoother, I implemented it. Every decision, every suggestion, every deliverable had a purpose beyond the immediate outcome. It contributed to a larger pattern of quiet mastery. The beauty of strategy is that it's invisible until the payoff hits. I practiced subtle influence. In meetings, I asked the right questions at the right moments. I offered insights that seemed casual, almost conversational, but were backed by careful research, analysis, and preparation. I learned when to speak and when to remain silent, allowing others to underestimate me while I positioned myself to deliver undeniable impact. Every pause, every glance, every nod was intentional. Small gestures, subtle, but powerful. I mapped my own growth like a chessboard. Week by week, I assigned skill-building targets, presentation tweaks, and efficiency gains. I tracked progress meticulously. This wasn't just improvement. It was precision engineering of perception and results. Quiet power is built from small, deliberate actions, not drama. And drama is what people expect. It's predictable. Mastery, subtlety, strategy that's unpredictable. By the second month, patterns were emerging. Colleagues assumed certain limitations about me. expecting hesitancy or caution. I leaned into that expectation. I let them believe what they wanted, while I quietly built competence, confidence, and visibility. The tension of their assumptions became my tool. Every underestimated move became a leverage point for future impact. I also cultivated foresight. I studied company trends, client behavior, workflow inefficiencies, and internal metrics. I predicted challenges before they arose, anticipated questions before they were asked, and prepared solutions no one else had thought to consider. By planning 3 steps ahead, I created moments where my input felt effortless, but in reality, it was deliberate, calculated, and strategic. Every interaction, every project, every deliverable now had layered intent. Emails weren't just informative. They built credibility. Meetings weren't just discussions, they demonstrated authority. Reports weren't just numbers, they were proof of mastery. By the time I finished a week, my small, unseen victories began accumulating, forming a pattern of excellence that others wouldn't detect until it was undeniable. And still, I remained understated. I didn't boast. I didn't call attention. I didn't let impatience sneak into my actions. The power of this strategy is in invisibility. The world watches for drama, conflict, and spectacle. But growth executed with precision is quiet, untraceable, and unstoppable. By the end of the 3rd month, I could see it taking shape, the framework of my impact, the architecture of results no one could ignore. And in the quiet moments, when I closed my eyes, I could imagine the shock, the disbelief, the subtle recalibration in my colleagues' minds when they realized what had been building right under their noses. This strategy was my canvas. Each subtle move, each tiny improvement, each calculated choice was a brushstroke, painting a masterpiece of quiet revenge, not cruel or petty, but undeniable, intelligent, and grounded in skill. By the time the results landed, no one would be able to argue. I had exceeded expectations, silently but completely. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave my body. The strategy was set. The moves were in place. The clock was ticking toward impact, but I had already won, because mastery, true mastery, is invisible until it's impossible to ignore. If you've ever been overlooked or underpaid, this part's for you, and if you feel that, hit that. The day the quarterly results were released, I walked into the office with the same calm rhythm it maintained for 93 days. My steps were measured, purposeful. The fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors, casting long, thin shadows that mirrored the tension building in the room. I could hear muted conversations, chairs scraping lightly, the low hum of keyboards and printers. Every micro sound felt amplified, as if the office itself were holding its breath. I reached my desk, laptop glowing faintly, papers stacked neatly. My notes were ready, but I didn't need them. Everything I had built over the past 90 days was already in motion. The dashboard blinked across the screen, KPIs and metrics neatly aligned, and my eyes lingered on each number. Each one told a story. Faster turnaround times, error reduction, client satisfaction off the charts, internal processes optimized. Every metric was proof that quiet work, executed with precision, cannot be ignored. The first whispers started almost immediately. Colleagues glanced sideways, subtle frowns, furrowed brows, incredulous expressions. I noticed the small gestures. Someone leaning back, mouth slightly open, a hand hovering over a keyboard, frozen mid-motion, a subtle intake of breath from the manager. The disbelief was palpable, almost cinematic, and yet I remained calm. I smiled softly, not proud, not boastful, just satisfied, like a painter observing a completed masterpiece. The conference room was filling. I followed, each step measured, calm, deliberate. People avoided my gaze at first, subtle, sidelong glances, unsure what to expect. I could feel the energy shift, almost like static in the air. This is the moment I had been building toward. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable impact. When the manager began reviewing the quarterly results on the big screen, I leaned against the wall, subtle, understated. The metrics scrolled by, department by department, team by team, and then my section, my projects, my metrics, my client outcomes all at the very top. The room went quiet. A few mouths opened, then closed. Eyebrows rose, eyes widened. Fingers paused mid-note. The disbelief was instantaneous, almost theatrical. I didn't move. I didn't gesture. I just observed. The silence stretched, weighted, heavy with tension. I noticed the micro-reactions. A colleague whispering to another, a hand tightening on a pen, someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Every expression, every subtle gesture confirmed what I already knew. The quiet work, the unseen growth, the deliberate strategy it had all landed. I caught the eye of the manager. For a moment, everything froze, time dilated. Their expression was careful, measured, but the admiration and respect was undeniable, filtered through layers of disbelief. I held their gaze with quiet confidence, letting the evidence speak louder than any words I could offer. Every metric, every line of data, every subtle improvement over 93 days was a testament to deliberate, silent mastery. Colleagues' whispers grew louder, though hushed, almost desperate. How? When? One person muttered under their breath. I didn't see this coming. That was exactly the point. They hadn't seen it coming. They didn't anticipate strategic, silent growth. The room buzzed now, low and electric, curiosity mixing with incredulity. As the discussion continued, I let them speak. I didn't interrupt, didn't boast, didn't defend myself. The results were louder than any rebuttal, louder than any argument. Every whisper they had cast over me, every micro-doubt, every underestimation it had transformed into proof, undeniable, inescapable. A few colleagues attempted to explain it away, attributing the success to luck, timing, or collaboration. But the truth was obvious to anyone paying attention. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was strategy, precision, and relentless, quiet effort. The evidence was overwhelming. When the manager finally addressed the room, voice deliberate, calm, measured, they highlighted the improvements, the metrics, and the outcomes. Praise was given specific, grounded, undeniable. I stood there, calm, subtle, letting the acknowledgement sink in. No gloating, no drama, just quiet satisfaction, like the eye of a storm, centered, composed, and powerful. I felt the shift in the room. Colleagues who had whispered doubts now regarded me with respect, tempered by surprise. The energy changed. The assumptions, the microaggressions, the underestimations, they were all reframed, rendered powerless by the evidence of my work. Quiet power had done what words never could. I let a small smile curve on my lips, not triumphalist, not vengeful, just satisfied. The revenge wasn't loud. It was smart, deliberate, grounded. I had exceeded every expectation, transformed every doubt into validation, and done so without drama. Every silent night of preparation, every unnoticed adjustment, every deliberate improvement had led to this moment. As the meeting ended, I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, aware of every glance, every micro-expression. They had witnessed growth they didn't anticipate. Disbelief, admiration, and respect hung in the air, palpable, undeniable, and I left the room with the same calm rhythm I had entered with, carrying nothing but quiet power and self-assuredness. Outside the conference room, I paused, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. The hum of the office was softer now, filled with subtle reverence. My phone buzzed messages from colleagues, tentative, congratulatory, some almost apologetic. I didn't respond immediately. I let the moment linger. The reversal was complete. The underestimated had risen. The quiet, deliberate power was now visible, undeniable, and grounded in truth. And in the quiet of that hallway, I whispered to myself, barely audible, "This is what growth looks like when no one expects it." The morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds as I stepped into the office. The usual buzz felt different today, quieter, more tentative, as though the space itself sensed a shift in energy. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step deliberate, measured. Papers and notebooks were under my arm, meticulously organized, every corner aligned perfectly. As I walked, I noticed subtle glances from colleagues, hesitant, questioning, wary. No whispers yet, just micro-reactions, small shifts in posture, the quiet anticipation that comes when people sense something has changed but don't fully understand how. I reached the conference room early, the air carrying the faint hum of electronics and the low, distant chatter of those preparing for the meeting. I set down my notes, neatly stacked, and adjusted my laptop. Everything was deliberate, intentional. I didn't rush. The room's soft, fluorescent light cast elongated shadows across the table, giving the space a quiet, almost cinematic weight. I breathed in slowly, grounding myself, aware of the rhythm of my heart, the calm behind my eyes. I knew what I had built over the last 93 days, and now it was time to let it speak. The manager arrived, calm, poised, carrying a tablet loaded with the quarter's results. Their eyes met mine for a brief moment, steady, measured, full of the subtle recognition I had worked toward earning not through words, but through action. "Monica," they said, voice clear and even, "I want to acknowledge your performance this quarter." I nodded once, soft, controlled, letting the words sink into the room without rushing them. As they began to present the data, I felt the room shift almost imperceptibly, the subtle energy change that precedes a revelation. My eyes swept across my colleagues as the first slide appeared, and I caught it immediately. A hand froze mid-gesture, pen suspended in the air, hovering as if trying to pause reality itself. Eyes widened, pupils dilated slightly, the unconscious reaction betraying disbelief. Shoulders straightened, then slumped again, a micro sign of recalibration, the brain attempting to reconcile expectation with reality. A faint intake of breath escaped one colleague, barely audible, but enough to signal that the numbers on the screen were more than anyone had anticipated. The metrics scrolled slowly, deliberately, almost ceremoniously. Turnaround times down by double digits, error rates slashed, client satisfaction scores soaring above projections. Workflow efficiency improved with a precision no one had imagined. Each line was not just a number, but a story, a silent testament to countless hours of deliberate, methodical work that had gone unnoticed until now. I could see minds processing the information, calculating, adjusting assumptions in real time. The disbelief was tangible, hanging in the air like static electricity, almost visible if you knew where to look. I observed subtle micro-reactions in detail. One colleague's fingers tapped nervously against the table, a subconscious attempt to regain control in the face of undeniable evidence. Another bit the inside of her lip, brows knitting as she tried to reconcile past judgments with current reality. A man shifted in his seat, a subtle creak in the chair punctuating the tension, his posture revealing a mix of surprise and admiration he hadn't yet articulated. I noticed the slight twitch of an eyebrow, the involuntary nod, the way someone leaned forward, closer to the screen, as if proximity could somehow bridge the gap between expectation and reality. The room felt like it had shrunk, energy condensed around the proof that had been building silently over 93 days. Each figure displayed wasn't just data. It was a quiet declaration, a calculated triumph, a subtle form of power that had taken months to craft. I could sense colleagues' minds racing, linking numbers to late nights, to meticulous revisions, to strategic choices they hadn't witnessed. A soft murmur arose, almost a whisper, as someone attempted to process the scale of improvements. Another's eyes darted to a neighbor, a silent exchange of disbelief, recognition, and the dawning understanding that I had risen above every expectation. I caught the faintest exhale of astonishment from a senior colleague, shoulders releasing tension just slightly, and a subtle lean back from another, as if needing physical space to absorb the weight of the revelation. Even the manager, usually composed, allowed a micro-expression, a barely perceptible tightening of the jaw, followed by a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The room, once casual and confident, was now taut with tension, reverence, and unspoken recognition. Every micro-gesture, every pause, every subtle adjustment added layers of meaning to the moment the underestimated had risen, quietly, deliberately, undeniably. And there I sat, chest steady, heart calm, watching the theater unfold exactly as I had visualized countless times. The satisfaction was deep, almost meditative, a quiet surge of validation that no applause could ever match. Every pause, every frozen hand, every subtle facial twitch became a testament to the months of deliberate effort, the unseen labor, the strategic cultivation of excellence. In that moment, the room itself seemed to acknowledge the transformation, every micro-gesture amplifying the reality. Quiet, calculated growth could not only survive doubt, it could dominate perception without a single word of confrontation. The manager's tone remained calm, professional, yet each word carried weight, echoing off the walls in a room that suddenly felt charged with recognition. "Monica, your projects have not only met expectations, they've exceeded them. Your strategic approach, attention to detail, and dedication have elevated outcomes across the department. These results speak for themselves." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I felt the room's energy shift subtly, but unmistakably. Colleagues who had whispered doubts now stole cautious glances, silently processing the transformation they hadn't anticipated. Some tried to rationalize it as luck or external help, but the truth was visible in every metric, every project improvement, every client commendation. This was evidence-based recognition, grounded in performance, impossible to dispute. As the manager continued, I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. Not triumphant, not boastful, just quiet, deliberate satisfaction. "Growth hits different," I said softly, voice calm and even when no one expects it from you. The room seemed to pause, the words hanging in the air. They were simple, yet precise, carrying the weight of months of unseen effort. They resonated, almost palpable, like the echo of every late night, every meticulous note, every subtle improvement that had gone unnoticed until now. The room responded in micro-gestures. Some colleagues leaned forward slightly, absorbing the statement. Others blinked, processing, their disbelief slowly transforming into recognition. The energy shifted, electric yet subtle, as the undeniable reality settled. The quiet work, the deliberate strategy, the sustained effort had created impact that no one could ignore. I reflected inwardly on every night I had stayed late, every hour spent refining presentations, every skill honed in silence, every whispered doubt, every underestimated suggestion, every microaggression had been transformed into fuel. Each small victory, Each unnoticed improvement had accumulated into undeniable proof. The justice in this moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was deliberate, calculated, grounded in reality, undeniable in its precision. The manager highlighted specific achievements, calling attention to the measurable changes. Turnaround times had improved by 25%. Client satisfaction scores had increased by 18%. Internal workflow efficiency had risen beyond projected targets. Each statistic, each figure, became an irrefutable testament to strategic, quiet mastery. I noticed colleagues' subtle reactions, a furrowed brow, a hesitant nod, a whispered remark to a neighbor. They were reconciling what they had assumed with the reality in front of them. I remained calm, observing. My satisfaction came not from applause, not from external validation, but from the knowledge that every deliberate choice, every small, unseen action had led to this outcome. The work had spoken louder than any critique, louder than whispers of doubt or judgment. Quiet power had prevailed. As the meeting continued, the room seemed to shrink around the impact of the results. Colleagues who had doubted now watched with cautious respect. The atmosphere shifted from casual chatter to subtle, attentive recognition. Even the manager, typically composed, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. The justice wasn't performative, it was earned. Visible in the numbers, in the metrics, in the undeniable competence I had cultivated. I glanced around, catching micro moments. A colleague's finger tapping lightly, processing. Someone leaning slightly forward, eyes wide. A subtle intake of breath from another, almost involuntary. These small gestures told a story louder than words. Assumptions had been overturned, judgments recalibrated, power quietly acknowledged. After the formal acknowledgement, as people began to disperse, I remained seated for a moment, letting the energy settle. The office hummed softly, the ambient sounds of typing and soft conversations blending with a subtle, almost reverent stillness. I reflected on the months of silent work, the deliberate steps, the cumulative victories. The justice I had achieved was not loud, not vengeful. It was intelligent, strategic, undeniable. I packed my notebook slowly, deliberately, each movement controlled, mindful. The satisfaction wasn't in recognition alone, but in knowing that the transformation was systemic, visible not only in numbers, but in perception, in the subtle recalibration of colleagues' assumptions, in the undeniable evidence of capability. Walking back to my desk, I felt a quiet calm, a grounded empowerment that radiated from internal mastery. The whispers of doubt, the microaggressions, the underestimations, they had all been neutralized, transformed into proof. My growth, my strategy, my results had done what words could never accomplish alone. I sat down, exhaled slowly, and opened my notebook to a single word, written long ago: opportunity. That word had guided every late night, every refined presentation, every micro-strategy. Today, it had blossomed into justice, visible, grounded, undeniable. And as I reflected, I whispered softly, almost to myself, let the work speak, let the results speak. And when they do, no one can deny your power. The subtle reverence, the recalibrated assumptions, the grounded recognition this was justice. Not loud, not dramatic, but strategic, intelligent, and earned through quiet, deliberate mastery. They doubted me. They whispered. They assumed I couldn't lead. And yet, here I am, proof that quiet power, relentless growth, and integrity speak louder than any words they threw at me. Those words echoed in my mind as I sat at my desk, the soft glow of my laptop illuminating a space that had become my sanctuary. I leaned back, letting the tension of the past months dissolve slowly into calm, deliberate awareness. The journey hadn't been about proving them wrong. It had been about proving myself right, that my work, my intellect, my strategy, my quiet mastery could shape outcomes beyond anyone's expectations. I thought about every Black woman in corporate America who had felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. I thought about the microaggressions, the casual side eyes, the whispered assumptions, the soft comments that cut subtly but persistently. I remembered how it felt to be questioned not on merit, but on perception. And I realized something crucial. Empowerment doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from growth, patience, and deliberate excellence. Over the months, every late night, every small improvement, every note taken, every skill honed became part of a larger mosaic. I transformed whispers into evidence, doubt into measurable achievement, underestimation into undeniable respect. The justice, the recognition, the respect I had earned it not through drama, not through argument, not through loud spectacle, but through strategic, persistent mastery. And that, I realized, is what true power looks like. The lesson wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who has been told she's too soft, too slow, too emotional, or not leadership material. Growth can be your quiet revenge. Growth can be your strongest weapon. Growth is strategic, measurable, undeniable, and it doesn't require anyone's permission. Every skill you refine, every decision you make intentionally, every action you take with precision builds a foundation stronger than judgment ever could undermine. I reflected on the moments when I had felt invisible, the whispered criticisms I overheard during calls, the colleagues who dismissed my ideas, the subtle exclusions. Each one had become a catalyst, a spark to illuminate the path of strategic improvement. Every time I leaned into patience, reflection, and preparation, I was investing not just in a career, but in legacy, in self-respect, and in community empowerment. Empowerment isn't only about your own victories. It's about creating a blueprint others can follow. When they see you rise quietly, deliberately, with intelligence and integrity, it validates what is possible. It tells the next Black woman in the office, the one hesitant to speak in meetings, the one worried her voice won't matter, that excellence is visible, growth is powerful, and impact can be undeniable. It whispers, "You belong. You are capable. You are brilliant." I smiled to myself, remembering the moment of recognition in the conference room, the subtle recalibration of assumptions, the quiet satisfaction that comes from work done intentionally. That moment was mine, but its ripples reached farther than I had imagined. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. Every intentional action, every skill refined, every metric improved, every subtle victory contributes to a culture shift, a culture where Black women are seen, valued, and respected not just for being resilient, but for being brilliant, strategic, and relentless in their quiet power. The truth is, stereotypes and microaggressions can't withstand sustained, strategic, intelligent effort. When we focus on our craft, our growth, and our results, we create undeniable proof. And proof is transformative. It changes perceptions, not through conflict, but through undeniable reality. It transforms environments. It shifts cultures. It empowers communities. As I looked out the window at the city skyline, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from the accolades, but from the knowledge that the journey had taught me the most powerful lesson. The greatest revenge, the most impactful justice, comes from deliberate growth, grounded in integrity, and executed with precision. That is the power of quiet mastery. That is the legacy of strategic persistence. I opened my notebook one last time, tracing the words I had written months ago. Opportunity, strategy, growth, evidence, power. Those words were no longer just notes. They were a map a blueprint for anyone seeking to rise above assumptions, microaggressions, and underestimation. They were proof that deliberate action, persistence, and integrity can change not only your trajectory, but the culture around you. And so, I whisper to every Black woman navigating corporate spaces, when they doubt you, let your results speak louder than words. When they underestimate you, let your growth become undeniable. When they dismiss you, let your excellence rewrite the assumptions. Your quiet power is your legacy. Your growth is your justice. And your integrity will always be louder than doubt. I leaned back, letting the soft glow of the screen wash over me, and allowed one final thought to settle. This is more than a career. It is empowerment. It is proof. It is community. And it begins with you. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this story. If it spoke to you, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us who we are. For every Black woman told to stay quiet, speak anyway.